thus forcibly reminded her of her loss; nor did I doubt, that in the tranquillity of our family circle at Windsor, she would recover some degree of composure, and in the end of happiness. My affection for Clara also led me to oppose these fond dreams of cherished grief. Her sensibility had already been too much excited, her infant heedlessness too soon exchanged for deep and anxious thought. The strange and romantic scheme of her mother might confirm and perpetuate the painful view of life, which had intruded itself thus early on her contemplation. On returning home, the captain of the steam packet with whom I had agreed to sail, came to tell me that accidental circumstances hastened his departure, and that if I went with him, I must come on board at 5 on the following morning. I hastily gave my consent to this arrangement, and as hastily formed a plan through which Perdita should be forced to become my companion. I believe that most people in my situation would have acted in the same manner, yet this consideration does not, or rather did not in after time, diminish the reproaches of my conscience. At the moment I felt convinced that I was acting for the best, and that all I did was right and even necessary. I sat with Perdita, and soothed her, by my seeming assent to her wild scheme. She received my concurrence with pleasure, and 1,000 times over thanked her deceiving, deceitful brother. As night came on, her spirits, enlivened by my unexpected concession, regained an almost forgotten vivacity. I pretended to be alarmed by the feverish glow in her cheek. I entreated her to take a composing draught. I poured out the medicine, which she took docilely from me. I watched her as she drank it. Falsehood and artifice are in themselves so hateful, that, though I still thought I did right, a feeling of shame and guilt came painfully upon me. I left her, and soon heard that she slept soundly under the influence of the opiate I had administered. She was carried thus unconscious on board. The anchor weighed, and the wind being favourable, we stood far out to sea with all the canvas spread, and the power of the engine to assist. We scudded swiftly and steadily through the chafed element. It was late in the day before Perdita awoke, and a longer time elapsed before recovering from the torpor occasioned by the laudanum, she perceived her change of situation. She started wildly from her couch, and flew to the cabin window. The blue and troubled sea sped past the vessel, and was spread shoreless around. The sky was covered by a rack, which in its swift motion showed how speedily she was borne away. The creaking of the masts, the clang of the wheels, the tramp above, all persuaded her that she was already far from the shores of Greece. "Where are we?" she cried. "Where are we going?" The attendant whom I had stationed to watch her replied, "To England." "And my brother?" "Is on deck, madam." "Unkind, unkind!" exclaimed the poor victim, as with a deep sigh she looked on the waste of waters. Then without further remark she threw herself on her couch, and closing her eyes remained motionless, so that but for the deep sighs that burst from her, it would have seemed that she slept. As soon as I heard that she had spoken, I sent Clara to her, that the sight of the lovely innocent might inspire gentle and affectionate thoughts; but neither the presence of her child, nor a subsequent visit from me, could rouse my sister. She looked on Clara with a countenance of woeful meaning, but she did not speak. When I appeared she turned away, and in reply to my enquiries only said, "You know not what you have done." I trusted that this sullenness betokened merely the struggle between disappointment and natural affection, and that in a few days she would be reconciled to her fate. When night came on, she begged that Clara might sleep in a separate cabin. Her servant, however, remained with her. About midnight she spoke to the latter, saying that she had had a bad dream, and bade her go to her daughter, and bring word whether she rested quietly. The woman obeyed. The breeze that had flagged since sunset now rose again. I was on deck, enjoying our swift progress. The quiet was disturbed only by the rush of waters as they divided before the steady keel, the murmur of the moveless and full sails, the wind whistling in the shrouds, and the regular motion of the engine. The sea was gently agitated, now showing a white crest, and now resuming a uniform hue. The clouds had disappeared, and dark ether clipped the broad ocean, in which the constellations vainly sought their accustomed mirror. Our rate could not have been less than 8 knots. Suddenly I heard a splash in the sea. The sailors on watch rushed to the side of the vessel, with the cry, "Some one gone overboard." "It is not from deck," said the man at the helm. "Something has been thrown from the aft cabin." A call for the boat to be lowered was echoed from the deck. I rushed into my sister's cabin. It was empty. With sails abaft, the engine stopped. The vessel remained unwillingly stationary, until after an hour's search my poor Perdita was brought on board. But no care could reanimate her, no medicine cause her dear eyes to open, and the blood to flow again from her pulseless heart. One clenched hand contained a slip of paper, on which was written, "To Athens." To ensure her removal thither, and prevent the irrecoverable loss of her body in the wide sea, she had had the precaution to fasten a long shawl around her waist, and again to the staunchions of the cabin window. She had drifted somewhat under the keel of the vessel, and her being out of sight occasioned the delay in finding her. And thus the ill-starred girl died a victim to my senseless rashness. Thus in early day she left us for the company of the dead, and preferred to share the rocky grave of Raymond before the animated scene this cheerful earth afforded, and the society of loving friends. Thus in her 29th year she died, having enjoyed some few years of the happiness of paradise, and sustaining a reverse to which her impatient spirit and affectionate disposition were unable to submit. As I marked the placid expression that had settled on her countenance in death, I felt, in spite of the pangs of remorse, in spite of heart-rending regret, that it was better to die so, than to drag on long miserable years of repining and inconsolable grief. Stress of weather drove us up the Adriatic Gulf, and our vessel being hardly fitted to weather a storm, we took refuge in the port of Ancona. Here I met Giorgio Palli, the vice-admiral of the Greek fleet, a former friend and warm partisan of Raymond. I committed the remains of my lost Perdita to his care, for the purpose of having them transported to Hymettus, and placed in the cell her Raymond already occupied beneath the pyramid. This was all accomplished even as I wished. She reposed beside her beloved, and the tomb above was inscribed with the united names of Raymond and Perdita. I then came to a resolution of pursuing our journey to England over land. My own heart was racked by regrets and remorse. The apprehension that Raymond had departed for ever, that his name, blended eternally with the past, must be erased from every anticipation of the future, had come slowly upon me. I had always admired his talents, his noble aspirations, his grand conceptions of the glory and majesty of his ambition, his utter want of mean passions, his fortitude and daring. In Greece I had learnt to love him; his very waywardness, and self-abandonment to the impulses of superstition, attached me to him doubly. It might be weakness, but it was the antipodes of all that was grovelling and selfish. To these pangs were added the loss of Perdita, lost through my own accursed self-will and conceit, this dear one, my sole relation, whose progress I had marked from tender childhood through the varied path of life, and seen her throughout conspicuous for integrity, devotion, and true affection, for all that constitutes the peculiar graces of the female character, and beheld her at last the victim of too much loving, too constant an attachment to the perishable and lost. She, in her pride of beauty and life, had thrown aside the pleasant perception of the apparent world for the unreality of the grave, and had left poor Clara quite an orphan. I concealed from this beloved child that her mother's death was voluntary, and tried every means to awaken cheerfulness in her sorrow-stricken spirit. One of my first acts for the recovery even of my own composure, was to bid farewell to the sea. Its hateful splash renewed again and again to my sense the death of my sister. Its roar was a dirge. In every dark hull that was tossed on its inconstant bosom, I imaged a bier, that would convey to death all who trusted to its treacherous smiles. Farewell to the sea! Come, my Clara, sit beside me in this aerial bark. Quickly and gently it cleaves the azure serene, and with soft undulation glides upon the current of the air; or, if storm shake its fragile mechanism, the green earth is below, we can descend, and take shelter on the stable continent. Here aloft, the companions of the swift-winged birds, we skim through the unresisting element, fleeting and fearlessly. The light boat heaves not, nor is opposed by death-bearing waves. The ether opens before the prow, and the shadow of the globe that upholds it shelters us from the noonday sun. Beneath are the plains of Italy, or the vast undulations of the wave-like Apennines. Fertility reposes in their many folds, and woods crown the summits. The free and happy peasant, unshackled by the Austrian, bears the double harvest to the garner, and the refined citizens rear without dread the long blighted tree of knowledge in this garden of the world. We were lifted above the Alpine peaks, and from their deep and brawling ravines entered the plain of fair France, and after an airy journey of 6 days, we landed at Dieppe, furled the feathered wings, and closed the silken globe of our little pinnace. A heavy rain made this mode of travelling now incommodious, so we embarked in a steam packet, and after a short passage landed at Portsmouth. A strange story was rife here. A few days before, a tempest-struck vessel had appeared off the town. The hull was parched-looking and cracked, the sails rent and bent in a careless, unseamanlike manner, the shrouds tangled and broken. She drifted towards the harbour, and was stranded on the sands at the entrance. In the morning the custom-house officers, together with a crowd of idlers, visited her. One only of the crew appeared to have arrived with her. He had got to shore, and had walked a few paces towards the town, and then, vanquished by malady and approaching death, had fallen on the inhospitable beach. He was found stiff, his hands clenched and pressed against his breast, his skin nearly black, his matted hair and bristly beard were signs of a long protracted misery. It was whispered that he had died of the plague. No one ventured on board the vessel, and strange sights were averred to be seen at night, walking the deck and hanging on the masts and shrouds. She soon went to pieces. I was shown where she had been, and saw her disjoined timbers tossed on the waves. The body of the man who had landed had been buried deep in the sands, and none could tell more than that the vessel was American built, and that several months before the Fortunatus had sailed from Philadelphia, of which no tidings were afterwards received. End of Chapter 3.